Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome. My name's Alison Stewart and I'm your host for this episode of Cut the Crop. And basically what we're doing today is a bit of a sort of real-time crop action. We're going to have Joe Drummond talking to us about cereals, and Richard Chynoweth is going to talk to us about seed and herbage. And it's really just what's happening at the moment in cereals and what's happening at the moment in the seed and herbage space. So welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Alison.
Okay, so, we've got our growers moving from sort of autumn through towards winter. What are they up to and what should they be up to?
So the first thing that comes to mind is controlling aphids for barley yellow dwarf virus. So we're approaching that first risk period, and that's around the time that our insecticide seed treatments are going to be finishing working at about start of tillering, and whether or not we need to go in with an insecticide. And that is going to be determined by the ratio of aphids to beneficial insects that you have in your system, and things like the weather, the time of sowing, and where you might be in terms of your region, because of course in Southland it's going to be a bit colder than it is up in the North Island. So we're looking at getting those beneficial insects to do the job for us, and if we're unsure and if there is a risk that those aphids might be getting out of control, making some strategic decisions around what types of products we're going to be using.
So what else is the big issues?
The other thing that we probably need to be thinking about is whether or not we need to go back with a post-emergent herbicide. And this is going to be really important because we need to look for volunteers and then make some decisions around what we're going to be using based on that. So a typical type of approach might be going in with something like Hasar or Phthalo or Rexaid. Things that we need to think about is the herbicide groupings are going to be changing. So the likes of what we used to call group A's and group B's are now group 1s and 2s, for example. So
so it's just the coding that's changing.
It's just the coding that's changing. It's nothing to do with the trade names themselves. It's just so that it lines up internationally. So we talked about the likes of Hasar being a group B. It's now going to be a group 2. Things like Rexaid, that's a group B and a group O. In the new speak, it's going to be a group 2 and a group 4. So just pay attention to those little bits and pieces. And really, if you're going to be following up with a post-emergence herbicide, match it to what you're seeing in your paddock. Other things to be thinking about is some parts of the country have had really dry autumns. And what that means is that for some of us, we might actually have just enough moisture there to start germinating grass weeds, but not quite enough moisture to activate the herbicide. That doesn't mean that the herbicide's not in the system. It just means that we need that moisture through to get it activated. So just little things like that we need to keep on top of. Additionally, we've also been doing, as part of the MBIE on herbicide resistance that's been led by AgResearch, they've been doing surveys. They've done them in the Selwyn region, South Canterbury, and just in the most recent season in Southland. And they've been looking at ryegrass weeds in particular, and they've picked up pretty widespread. So group A and B, that means group 1 and 2. So group A's, that's the likes of your FOPs, your DIMs, your DEMs, and your group B's are things like the sulfur ureas. I mentioned earlier, those are now your group 1s and group 2s.
So this is resistance.
This is resistance, and we're seeing this pretty widely in South Canterbury, to a lesser extent in the Selwyn district, and the results from the Southland survey, they're being processed at the moment. So they're just things that you need to keep on top of and be aware of. And if you have concerns about herbicide resistance and things not working the way they should, please talk to your rep or get in touch with us at FAR. So those are some things you need to be thinking about.
Okay. So anything else?
Again, we've talked about it being a bit warm and a bit dry. You've worked really hard all through the year and you've put a lot of time and energy and money into your crop in the paddock, and now you've gone and you've put it in your silo and shut the door. Have a look, because grain storage pests love it when it gets really warm. And if you've harvested, particularly on a hot day, that grain has gone into that store maybe 10 to 15 degrees hotter than what the ambient temperature is. So if you harvested and it was a 30-degree day, that could be up to sort of 45 degrees within a silo. So making sure that if you have got aeration that you're using it. If you are in a position where you're needing to dry your grain, you've got the appropriate sort of drying conditions within your silo. If you are thinking about treating, or if you have treated, there are a number of products out there, but they all rely on organophosphates. So be really, really careful. Make sure you use them as they say on the label, and if something comes through that hasn't died where it's supposed to have died, please get in touch with us. We're already starting to see populations of sawtooth grain beetles, so that's one of our main secondary pests that have different sensitivities towards some of those main OPs, so just keep your eye out. It has been warm, so make sure you can cool your grain, keep it cool, keep it dry, keep the outside of your silo nice and clean and free from grain spills, and it should be okay. But if it's not, please get in touch.
Yeah. At least we don't have those horrendous plagues of mice that they have over in Australia. Which just look at that and think, oh my gosh, that's absolutely awful.
No, we don't have that, thankfully. But just keep on top of things, because I occasionally get called to go to a silo and I open the door and I don't like to see it crawling, and neither do farmers. And like I said earlier, you've spent a lot of time and energy and money getting that crop across the line, and to put it in a shed and shut the door. Well, it goes in and it's already at its highest point in quality. So you're wanting to maintain that quality as long as it's in storage. And the longer it's in storage, the greater the risk of other things happening, like bugs and other issues such as mould. So we're really wanting to maintain that quality as much as we can.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks very much, Jo.
Thank you.
Okay, so following on from Jo, we've now got Richard Chynoweth with us, and we're going to talk about seed and herbage crops. Welcome, Richard. So, what's happening with seed crops? And I guess, are there any particular issues that the growers should be sort of focusing on?
This time of the year, most of the crops will be planted. There might still be a little bit of ryegrass to be planted, but most of that should be in by June. So hopefully that's sort of done. Ryegrass should be looking to be grazed in the next 2 months. And so, that's really just trying to control biomass between now and closing in September. Cocksfoot, tall fescue, probably looking at finishing grazing very soon. So we want to look after the autumn form tillers in those crops. They're the ones that are going to produce us our seed heads come next spring. Mm-hmm. And weed control is probably the main thought of most people at the moment. So really, getting out and seeing what's out there, seeing what might have escaped through the pre-emerge herbicides that autumn's been very dry in certain areas, so we need moisture to activate ethofumicate in particular, or Nortron in a lot of our grass crops.
So how much moisture do you need to be able to activate those?
You really need 10 mils of rain within a few days of application. In years when rainfall's sporadic, split applications can be quite useful. So applying them 14 days apart, or half the ethofumicate pre-emerge and half post-emerge. If you don't know that you're going to get rainfall inside a particular window, that can be a useful strategy. But really at this point in time, it's just seeing what's escaped, looking particularly at headlands or areas that where weeds are likely to be present, so like hairgrass or bromes and grass seed crops, and then talking with the different company reps and whatnot to come up with a plan of what you should do between now and harvest, because once they get through that pre-emerge herbicide, there's actually very little we can do now for some of those.
With that rain that we got over the last couple of days, is that going to bring quite a lot of weeds through?
Could bring a flush of weeds. That would depend on sowing date and herbicide application date. So if it's been more than a month, maybe you'll get some escapes through.
Yeah.
For the likes of poa and some of those sort of weeds, then application can still be made to control some of those, or at least suppress them into the bottom part of the canopy. But with rainfall, and hopefully more rainfall on the way, does raise the option of using curb or polka or the equivalents in clover seed crops and brassica seed crops. So I'd just encourage growers to have that on hand we know that we should be applying that in the middle of winter when it's wet and miserable, and to get the optimum results. So yeah, that would be one thing, to make sure it's on hand for when the weather comes right, so you don't have to wait a fortnight or something to get it and put
when
it on.
the weather comes right.
When
You're
the weather
very
comes
optimistic, aren't you?
It'll rain one day. It's just a matter of when.
So from irrigation point of view then, where are we going to sit then moving into, a spring crop?
Yeah, I think it's important to start planning for the spring, especially we know at the moment that bore levels and groundwater levels are pretty low, especially in parts of Canterbury. And just looking at how you can split or look at splitting the current crops you've got into irrigation management areas or groups. So and also what options you've got to spread the water use pattern. So can you plant something in the spring such as maize that doesn't require a lot of water in October, November, and then you have water hopefully that you can use in January, February when it is really requiring it, and a lot of the cereal crops have finished. Have you got white clover that you can use less water on compared with grasses and cereals? So coming up with a bit of a plan now as to which crop you may drop out if it gets to that stage.
Yeah.
Hopefully we get some rain through winter and recharge some aquifers and don't end up in a scenario like last season where even subsurface or the lower profiles in the soil were actually dry at the start of spring. Hopefully they'll be dampened by us a few more weeks of stored water way this season.
So what about, grass grubs and slugs?
Yeah, pests always have a habit of showing up in the middle of winter when crop growth slows down and the damage starts to become visible. So slugs, I think at the moment, it's really a monitoring phase. Winter's usually the least damaging viewpoint. Their activity slows down as well, but you can't be complacent this time of the year, especially headlands and bits and pieces. And with some moisture around, maybe for the first time in a while, the slugs might actually get going and be breeding, which they tend to have a habit of doing when it's damp and miserable. Grass grub, this time of the year there's you can monitor for damage. The grubs will be starting to put on some fat. So anything that's large in size will probably feed for another month. The smaller ones are probably the things to look out for. So if there's grass grub that still look black, don't have a big fat layer on them, then they're likely to feed through to August, somewhere in that time frame. So if you deprive them of food at the moment, they'll come back and bite come springtime when something gets planted. So if there's food in the ground and they need living root tissue at the moment to feed on, then they'll build up fat over the next couple of months and won't be an issue in the springtime. But if you're going into a spring crop, you really want those fed now. So you might need to sacrifice something. So they need living roots, whether it's weeds or plants, crop that's there to get them through, and that way that you might get away without having to control them come springtime for establishment of peas or spring cereals or what it might be.
So any other sort of crop management issues that you think need to be front of mind?
I think just right at the moment it's really weed control and looking at what's escaped and then coming up with good plans to hopefully manage or avoid herbicide resistance issues. So whether that's wild oats or anything else really. I guess wild oats are one that people might want to be looking at controlling in grass seed crops over the next wee while, but they have to be careful of withholding periods and for grazing and things like that. So at the moment, winter time's ideal time to be trying to control phalaris and wild oats with the Puma type herbicides and grasses. But they do have a 6-week withholding period, so grazing becomes a problem. Yeah. If that's important at this time of the year, which will depend on sowing date and how things have really got out of the ground in the autumn.
Okay, excellent. Any other take-home messages or words of wisdom?
No, not that I can think of off the top of my head. We just hope for some rainfall, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks very much, Richard. And thank you very much, listeners. Have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.